Hey, and welcome gurus to this demo lesson, Cross-Region Load Balancing. I'm Chase, one of your Azure training architects here at A Cloud Guru, a Pluralsight company, and it's in this lesson that we're going to learn about setting up a global Azure load balancer so that we have that cross-region failover between load balancers behind that global load balancer. And we're going to use a case study scenario here to help us understand what we're going to have inside of the Azure Cloud Sandbox whenever we set up our demonstration, and then we're going to go through the demo steps that we'll take to complete this demo for setting up cross-regional load balancing using Azure Load Balancer, and then we'll bring it back to the slides for some key takeaways. So for our Control Suites organization, we're actually going to be working inside of two regions here. Whenever we make our deployment for setting up our demonstration in the Azure Cloud Sandbox, we're going to have a deployment in East US 2 where we have a hub virtual network that we're familiar with an Azure Load Balancer that is public with VMs in its backend pool. And then we're going to have the same setup in West US using our Spoke VNet, again, a public Azure Load Balancer with VMs in the backend pool. Now, as always, the demo setup is going to be available in the resources of this lesson. For our demonstration steps, once we've got the demo set up, we're going to start off by implementing our cross-regional load balancer by creating a global tier public standard SKU Azure Load Balancer. We're going to configure a backend pool of the load balancers we have in East US 2 and West US. And then we're going to create a load balancing rule to balance traffic between these two different Azure load balancers, giving us that cross-regional load balancing. And then to test the failover, what we're going to do is stop those VMs running in the back end of one of our Azure load balancers. And this is going to allow us to make sure that it is failing over to the other region. Now, let's make our way into the Azure portal and get started. All right, Guru, so here we are inside of the Azure portal using our Azure Cloud Sandbox with the Cloud Shell already set up and configured for a storage account. If you haven't done that, go ahead and do so you can use the Cloud Shell to deploy the demo setup. The demo setup is available in the resources of this lesson. Once you get it, open it up, copy all of that down, bring it over to your Cloud Shell, paste it in, and it's going to go off and set up the demo resources for us. We're going to provide our admin username for our VMs, and then we're going to provide our password here. And this is just so we can log in and do a little troubleshooting. We'll go ahead and accept this default parameter here for our artifacts location SaaS token. This is just if we were pulling it from somewhere that required some sort of SaaS token, we could provide that SaaS token here. We don't have one in this case, so we'll just hit enter, and it's going to go off and create all of these resources. So we're going to skip ahead about 15 to 20 minutes from now whenever it's complete. All right, Guru, so we're back with our resources finished provisioning, as we see here by our succeeded message for the provisioning state. We'll minimize our Cloud Shell here. And if we look, we have 17 resources. We'll minimize the essentials blade here. And what we see if we sort by type are all the different resources that we have here. And most importantly, we have two load balancers, East US and West US. I apologize, East US 2 actually, and then West US. What we're going to do at this point is we're going to create a global Azure load balancer. So if we come up to the search bar here and we type in load balancing, we can choose load balancing to help me choose a solution here. We'll click create for Azure load balancer. And then we're going to select our resource group. We're going to put this load balancer in. We're going to call this our global LB-01. And we have to select a home region here. Now, we're going to leave it at East US. But we also could select a different home region. And this is going to deploy that global load balancer into a specific region. We'll leave it at the standard SKU here. It's going to be a public type Azure load balancer. And we're going to select a tier of global here. Again, we have to make sure that we're deploying it to a supported home region, and you can find out more about that here. And I'll also link that in the resources of this lesson. Then we're going to click next into our front-end IP configuration here. We're going to add a front-end IP config. We're going to call this our global IP config, and we're going to create a public IP address by clicking create new. We're going to call this our global LB pip. And we're going to click OK. We're going to click Add. And then we're going to click Next to go into our backend pools here. And we're going to add backend pools of our Azure load balancers. We're going to call this here our LBBE pool. and we're going to select our load balancers here. We're going to select our hub LB and then the front end IP config that it's associated with. And then we're going to select the spoke and the front end IP for that one as well. And we see it's giving us a back and pull of both of our load balancers and their public IP addresses. We'll click add here, and we'll move into our inbound rules, and we'll click add a load balancing rule here. And we're going to call this our LB rule. And then we're going to select our front end IP address for our global load balancer. Our back and pull is going to be our LBBE pool that we just created here. And if we knew what port we were going to use, we could specify that here. And we also specify our protocol. We'll use TCP. And then we're going to say, I know my port. We'll use port 80 here. And this is going to map the front end port 80 to the back end port 80. We could set up our session persistence here, the same as before, using that 5-tuple hash of information, the client IP and protocol, the client IP or none. We'll leave it at none. We'll leave the rest as they are by default. Click add, and then we're going to move into our outbound rule here. Click next in tags, click next in review and create, and then we're going to let it validate the deployment. Click create once it's passed, and it's going to go off and create our global Azure load balancer. Now this can take about 15 to 20 minutes, so we'll be back once this is done. Okay, Gurus, so we're back, and as you can tell, the deployment of our global load balancer has actually failed. While this is not an error that I intended for us to run into, I am glad that this happened because it presents us a unique opportunity to present a real-life error we would run into in deploying a global load balancer. I didn't want to edit this away because I wanted to be transparent in showing you that not everything is picture perfect, even on my end, as I'm recording and going through demonstrating how to use these solutions, even I run into errors. And this presents us an opportunity to see a real-life error that we would see as engineers out in the industry working as professionals. So let's dive into actually resolving and troubleshooting this error. If we look here at the error details, we see information basically stating that the public IP address associated with this global load balancer was not in a supported home region. So if we do a bit of digging on deploying global load balancers, what we'll find is that you can only deploy your cross-region load balancer or public IP in global tier in one of the regions above. We see a list of supported home regions here, and we used East US, which is not part of this list. So if we were to use one of these home regions from the supported list, like Central US, we should be able to deploy this resource. So if we go back to the portal, we exit out of our errors here and we click redeploy, we'll get another shot at this. We'll select our resource group here, and then we can choose our location. We'll change our location parameter here to Central US or one of those ones from the supported home region. We'll click review and create. Now this is going to present us with another error that I am familiar with running into, and we'll click view error details here. And we see that the resource global-lb-pip already exists in a location, East US, in resource group. We need a different region here is basically what this is telling us. So if we exit out of this and we go back to previous and we edit the template, we'll see we have a viewer here to see what builds out our template. We have our load balancer address pools, and our public IP address resource. And a neat trick here when working with ARM templates is we can actually click into this template, hit Control F, and what we can do is look for all mentions of that global LB-pip. And what we can do here, click the drop down, we can replace this with global LB-pip-01, and then we can replace all mentions. We'll click save here, and then we'll select our resource group again. We'll change our location for the home region to Central US, and then we'll click review and create, and this time it will properly validate the deployment for us, and we'll click create, and now it's going to go off and create our global load balancer successfully in a home region. So we'll be back once this is done. Okay, Gurus, so this one was much quicker. After just a couple minutes, our deployment is complete. So if we go to our resource group here and make sure to hit refresh, and we close up our essentials information here, sort by type, and go to our load balancers, we'll see we have that global load balancer that we chose to deploy. If we click on it here, we see we have a public IP address, and that's that new public IP that we created in one of the supported home regions. And then we see we have a backend pool here of our load balancers, our hub and spoke load balancer, and their public IP addresses, and our load balancing rule for them. So now we'll go back to the overview here. We'll click on the public IP address, and we're going to copy this public IP, and we're going to paste it into the browser and see where it takes us. And as we see, it says, hello world from host Cake Hub VM01. So it's being sent from this global load balancer to the load balancer that is actually behind our hub load balancer. Now, this will be balanced between our hub and our spoke. And so what we can actually do here is show that failover. We were originally going to do the failover in the spoke, but in this case, it sent us to the hub. So we'll go and fail over the hub to see if it sends us now to the spoke. So we'll go back to the portal here. We'll click home. We'll go into our resource group. And then we'll go to our virtual machine here in the hub, that VM01. We'll click on it, and we're just going to stop it to simulate that failover. And as soon as this is stopped, what we should see when we refresh that public IP address tab here with our global load balancer is that it's actually going to send us over to the spoke. Now, stopping a virtual machine usually just takes a minute or two. So if we keep hitting refresh here, we'll see already it's in a deallocating status. And as soon as we hit refresh here again, we see now it's stopped. So if we come back up to the browser tab here and we hit refresh, now we're sent to the spoke VM01. So we've successfully set up a global load balancer. All right, gurus, let's make our way back to the slides for some key takeaways. All right, gurus, congratulations on following along in the demonstration in setting up a global load balancer for a cross-region load balancing solution. Now, the key takeaways here to take with you into the field and into the exam are the purpose of cross-region load balancing. First off and foremost, regional redundancy for balancing traffic. And in this case, we had regional redundancy for balancing traffic to two different public load balancers behind our global Azure load balancer. And this provided us that availability to balance traffic across the globe to these regions. And we could have had multiple regions involved. We didn't have to just have these two. And this provides us also the ability to have lower latency when serving our traffic. Now, the prerequisites of cross-region load balancing is that it is only supported for our global load balancer when using a standard SKU. And we have to use that global tier. And we only can balance traffic to public load balancers in the backend pools because those public load balancers make up those backend pool resources that we're balancing to across the globe. And as we saw in our demo, we can run into errors when setting up these solutions, but it's important that we find the opportunities when those present to troubleshoot and resolve those issues. And in our case, all we had to do was make sure to use a supported home region and then update the template where it referenced our public IP address because that resource was created even though the load balancer was not created. So we just had to update that in the template and redeploy, and success, we set up a cross-region load balancing solution with our global load balancer. All right, gurus, that is all my time for now. Thanks so much for joining me in this lesson, and I look forward to seeing you in the next lesson.